be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel. So the focus of our science webinar today is basically the science that is behind our policy brief on policy needs for oceans and human health. This was a policy brief that we created after, as part of the SOFI project, Horizon 2020 project, on strategic, where we created a strategic research agenda for oceans and human health. So you can download both of those two documents from our website if you're interested. So the Oceans and Human Health strategy had three main areas, key areas of action. And the one that we'll be specifically looking at today is the one on blue spaces, tourism and well-being. We'll have two speakers. The first one is Alexander Hooyberg, from a PhD researcher from the Flanders Marine Institute here in Ostend. And the second one is Severin, also a PhD researcher here at the Flanders Marine Institute. So without any further ado, I will stop sharing my screen, and Alexander will start sharing his and start with the talk. Thanks.
Hello, Sheila. Thank you for this very nice introduction, and also hello, everybody else. So let me first share my screen. So today we are talking indeed about oceans and human health. That's a research topic that came into play a couple of years ago, and that has already gained a lot of attention. And what it's basically about is about the relationships between the oceans and human health, of course, but that our, yes, now it works, that our current generations and our future generations are inextricably linked to the health of the ocean, and that we also should manage the ocean sustainably to keep making use of these benefits. And that's, of course, very necessary and highly important if you want to tackle the current challenges that are ahead of us in the light of climate change and our increasing population size, for example, but also to meet our sustainable development goals. And in this topic about, especially the health effects from the ocean, the SOFI project has indeed identified three target areas for the research in the coming decade, and one of which is blue spaces, tourism and well-being, which we'll talk about in our presentations. And what we really need to make our science have an impact in society, we need this transdisciplinary research, awareness in all sectors of society, and the engagement of citizens and all the stakeholders that are involved. So today, Marine and I will talk about a bit the health and the well-being benefits in this framework. And Marine will mainly talk about the well-being aspects, and I will mainly talk about the health aspects. But as you know, of course, these two constructs are very much dependent on each other and intermingled. So today I will focus on three things. The first one is a bit of an introduction and all the questions that we want to tackle during my PhD. The second one will focus on a study that we are about to submit to a scientific journal that investigated how the landscape type and the content of the landscape impacted the perceived restoration along the Belgian coast using a picture experiment. And then in the third section of my talk, I will focus a bit more on another experiment that we did, a virtual reality experiment with a lot of psychophysiological measurements. But you will see later on how this fits in. So the topic of my PhD is to investigate the impact of coastal environments on human health. And I'm doing this with this really transdisciplinary team of researchers. And it contains experts in the fields of health sciences, sociology, psychology, and also environmental economics even. And our first study revealed that people who live at the coast in Belgium report a better general health. But besides from this and the similar results from the UK, we know actually very little about the specific outcomes and the influencing factors of these relationships. So the first thing that we want to assess is the spatial aspect. Is there spatial variation along the Belgian coast? Are there differences between particular types of environments? And then in a second aspect also, what are the particular influencing factors, such as the presence of litter, the amount of people, etc. And also we are very interested in what items of the environment really make it restorative and really draw people's attention and are interesting to look at. The second aspect that we want to investigate is the human aspect, of course, where we want to go a bit deeper into the actual emotional, cognitive, and physiological outcomes, and which people can actually benefit most from these outcomes. And then there's a third and a last aspect that we also want to tackle, which is the societal aspect, in which we want to highlight a bit that the experience at the Belgian coast or at any coast is also sociologically driven. People have certain relationships with others, etc. And that it also has an economic side. And so we want to, for example, investigate the avoided costs for the healthcare sector. And the idea is of these broad topics to touch upon the tip of the iceberg of this very huge research field, where we can, where practically everything is still quite open, but we want to highlight areas for further research specifically. So in the second part of my talk, I want to focus on this manuscript that we're having quite ready to be submitted, which is about the influence of the landscape type and the content on the psychological restoration along the Belgian coast. And we learned from these theories about how people can benefit from nature, that the amount of restoration depends on the type of environment and their components. But if you look at the coast, we really see a mosaic of all different kinds of environments, and no one has actually taken this into account. We see beaches, dunes, green spaces, dikes, and all kinds of natural and urban spaces. And we wanted to investigate the inter and intra-environment variation. So differences between environments, but also within environments, such as along the beach. Because, as you know, in summer, a lot of these beach bars, for example, pop up, and a lot of other anthropogenic influences. In the second aspect of the study, we also wanted to take a look at the physical components and their effects on the restoration. So in order to investigate this, we set up a picture rating experiment with students of Ghent University, and we showed them 52 pictures in a random order for 8 seconds each, so very brief. And these pictures represented 10 coastal environments and 5 beach-specific environments. And note here that these 5 beach-specific environments are embedded under the beaches for the 10 coastal environments comparison. And we asked each participant to rate it on the Adapted Perceived Restorativeness Scale, or PRS in short. It's a very widely used scale to assess the restorativeness of the environment, and it includes items of likelihood of the restoration, being away, fascination, coherence, and compatibility. And if we compare these scores between the 10 coastal environments, then we see actually a very nice gradual change in the perceived restoration. And these results are corrected for multiple testing and other covariates, of course. And we see that here the more natural environments, such as salt marshes, dunes, and beaches on the left, really score up to 30% higher compared to the more urban areas, such as dikes, docks, and towns. If you really want to know about the significant differences, you can take a look at the lines below. And 2 environments differ significantly if they do not share a line. For example, the dunes do share a line with the salt marshes, beaches, and green parks, but not with the piers. So that's where the significant difference is. If we do the same for the environments at the beach, we see that pictures taken in a beach bar or between beach cabins score considerably lower compared to pictures taken on a breakwater or in the seawater or in the more natural areas. So again, this naturalness seemed to play a very big role in shaping the restorativeness of an environment. And also important here is that you have never seen a red bar which indicates that there is no degrading effect of the coast on restoration, which is very good, but it's actually a positive or a neutral effect. So in the second part of this study, we looked at the specific content of each picture, and we actually delineated all the aspects of the picture with polygons, and we classified these concepts hierarchically so that we have a bunch of natural, urban, and people-related classes. For example, we have a couple of types of vegetation, dune vegetation, and other stuff. Also, types of sky, types of urban things, etc. All things that we identified on the picture. And if we relate this to the PRS, again corrected for multiple testing, we see that the natural constitutes are mostly positively associated with the PRS, and that the urban aspects are negatively associated with the PRS. So again, this naturalness seems to play really the most important factor. And more important is that we really have a refinement compared to previous studies that mainly assessed nature versus urban aspects without looking into it further. More interesting for urban planners is that we also provide useful knowledge about where blue tourism should be directed to in order to maximize the health benefits, and also making sure that there is enough accessibility to these natural environments. Also in the light of green cities, for example, it can really have an effect on human health and not only on the environmental health. And lastly, also the coastal protection systems can be viewed from a health perspective, in that sense that dikes and more urban structures will probably be less restorative compared to more natural structures. These, of course, need to be outweighed for their protection potential. Obviously, these results can also lead to cost-effective therapies for mental health, really guided nature on prescription, but we need to know, of course, a lot more about the relationship before really implementing that. And this study also has a couple of limitations and strengths, of course, and most of them refer to the exploratory design of our study. Because we use these students, which are not representative for the population, also it's very specific for Belgium, and we also assess the perceived restoration from pictures, which is, of course, not the most representative thing. And that's actually why in our next study, we focused really on a multi-sensory exposure through virtual reality, and also to capture a lot of the psychophysiological measurements to really have an objective view on the restoration. And we did this for virtual blue, green, and urban spaces, where the blue spaces are obviously the coast, more in particular, the beach. And this is actually an experiment that we performed this summer, and the data analysis is still ongoing, but I still wanted to share how we accomplished to measure a lot of different constructs together. So what we did was setting up a randomized controlled crossover design where each participant viewed 2 virtual reality environments. Everybody received the beach in a random order, and then the other one was either a beach with litter, green, or an urban space. And each video was constructed of 8 2-minute scenes, different scenes, which we all filmed ourselves with this 360 camera on a tripod. And to show you a bit of a demo, here you can see, for example, a beach with litter along the Belgian coast, of course. And you see that we really wanted to know the effects of representative amounts of litter. We could have placed a whole lot of litter, but we specifically chose for these 3 items approximately in a radius of about 3 meters from the camera. So what we then did was all these measurements. So we did them before, during, and after these virtual reality sessions. And the first thing that we measured was the cognitive functioning. So it's something very attention related and very psychological. So we asked them to do a task, and we compared their performance on it. We also asked the questionnaire about their positive and negative mood, but then more importantly is the physiology. And we actually measured a whole lot of physiological factors simultaneously, which were the brain activity, the heart, cardiovascular measures, but also muscle tension, respiration, temperature, and skin conductance. And you've probably been stressed before, and then you also feel these sweaty hands, that's where the skin conductance refers to, cold hands, fingertip temperature, faster breathing refers to the respiration, and all these muscle tensed up and all these other factors as well. And thanks to the brilliant marine research idea for which we applied and we granted it, we could actually buy the necessary equipment to measure all these constructs simultaneously, which you can see on the picture. So these were a lot of sensors, and with the use of virtual reality, it was quite convenient. And also with the help of 4 master students, we did this experiment over summer. And here is an example of the data that we collected specifically for the physiology. And what we immediately saw was that there are a lot of consistencies between the factors. For example, the heart rate and the respiration really co-vary. So when there's more oxygen in the blood due to an increase in, due to an inhaling, for example, the heart rate must pump faster to distribute this oxygen to the body. And then on the left side, you see all the other things that we mentioned, that I mentioned. And on the right side, you see the gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta waves, which are subtracted from the EEG signal and actually reflect different kinds of brain states. So that was it a bit for my presentation, and I hope that you remember by this evening that the restoration potential depends on the coastal landscape and its components, and that probably also the psychophysiological outcome that you are assessing will matter considerably. Thank you for listening, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. If you have additional questions, you can always send them to me, and I'm really happy to answer emails, so really send them to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. That was really interesting. So we'll hold the questions, I think, until afterwards, but we'll follow on now with Marine. I've already written down a few questions, Alexander, so you better get ready. But we'll follow on with Marine's questions. For those of you watching online, you can put questions to Alexander in the Q&A, just put for Alexander, and you can write them now already while Marine gets her screen set up. So off you go. We can't hear you yet, Marine. Maybe you want to just say something.
Sorry,
okay,
classical error of not unmuting.
There we go.
But yeah, so thank you, Sheila, and hello, everyone. My name is Severin, and I will be presenting to you my doctoral research on emotional mechanisms underlying the beneficial impact of coastal environments on mental well-being. So I'm conducting this research at the Flanders Marine Institute in collaboration with Ghent University and KU Leuven. So as my colleague Alexander already mentioned, our research is set into the transdisciplinary field of oceans and human health, which, as the policy brief of the European Marine Board states, is linked to a number of sustainable development goals, including the SDG number 3, which is good health and well-being, and SDG number 14, which is life below water. So if we take a closer look at SDG number 3, it's important to understand exactly what is meant by well-being. And so well-being is typically conceptualized according to 2 different perspectives. The first is hedonic well-being, which considers well-being to be linked to feeling happy and to be satisfied with one's life, and also to not experience too much stress or negative affect. The second perspective, which is eudaimonic well-being, this aspect views well-being as living one's life in accordance with one's true self, and depending on factors such as personal growth, positive relationships, purpose in life, and self-acceptance. So current marine policies rarely take into account a human component, and the ones that do only refer to physical health and not mental well-being. However, well-being is being increasingly acknowledged in society and in the healthcare center, and we all know that well-being is closely linked to both mental and physical health. So it's very important to understand what factors can we use to promote well-being. And in our case, an example of such a factor is coastal environments. So as Alexander already mentioned, there is a positive effect of being exposed to the coast on our health and well-being. And one way to understand this is to look at the mechanisms that explain this effect. So the majority of the literature have focused on mechanisms such as physical activity, social interactions, attention restoration, and environmental factors. However, there is one mechanism that is still poorly understood, and that is the emotional factors. So my PhD intends to fill this knowledge gap by looking into what emotions are triggered or associated with the coast, and to what extent do they explain the coast's positive effect on well-being. And so I focus on 3 specific emotions, namely the emotions of awe, nostalgia, and nature connectedness. So to address, to briefly describe these emotions, awe is typically defined as being triggered when you perceive something as bigger than yourself, and you feel the need to accommodate or change your mental conceptions to comprehend this. Nostalgia is defined as a sentimental yearning for the past, and nature connectedness is considered as an individual's subjective sense of one's relationship with the natural world. So these 3 emotions appear to have a special link with nature and with the coast in particular. So for example, the coast can trigger awe through its aesthetic beauty and its vast landscape. And the coast can also elicit nostalgia with an impression of timelessness and its unchanging nature in comparison to the fast-paced modern life. And nature connectedness has been found to increase during visits to the coast. Now, in return, these emotions also seem to positively influence different facets of well-being, such as life satisfaction, stress, and meaning in life. So there is enough theoretical background to suggest that these emotions might partly explain why the coast benefits well-being. Now, to address this research question, we did a study that took opportunity of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we all remember that during the first wave lockdown in Belgium in 2020, there was a restriction in circulation, which meant that the majority of the population no longer had access to the coast. And we call this group inland residents. And only a small group of the population who lived near enough to the coast still had access to the coast. And we call this group coastal residents. So with the use of an online survey, we found that having access to the coast during the lockdown was associated with a higher well-being. And more specifically, these coastal residents, they reported feeling less bored, less worry, and happier than inland residents. We also found that feeling awe at the coast was negatively correlated with feeling bored. And so considering the growing awareness of the mental health impact of COVID-19 pandemic, the study shows promising results in terms of utilizing coastal exposure to protect well-being for future crises. Now, to further understand these emotional pathways that link the coast with well-being, we also did a qualitative study that explored how coastal residents make sense of the emotions they experience at the coast and what role do these emotions play on their well-being. So for this, we recruited a purposive sample of 8 Flemish adults who were aged between 21 and 25 years old and who had grown up at the coast or were currently living near it. And now with each participant, we did a semi-structured interview via Skype, and each interview lasted between 40 to 60 minutes. And during the interviews, we asked questions such as, how was their relationship like with their coast, with the coast throughout their life? What specific emotions do they feel when they're at the coast? And what effect does experiencing these emotions have on them? So we then analyzed the interviews with the approach of interpretive phenomenological analysis. So very briefly, this approach allows us to interpret the subjective experience of the participants while keeping aware of how our own experience can influence this interpretation. So for this, we had to follow a step-by-step procedure, which allowed us to identify 5 prominent themes that emerged from the interviews and that were applicable to all the participants, but that also took into account notable exceptions. So the first 3 themes that we found related to specific emotional states that the participants reported to experience at the coast. So namely emotional restoration, awe, and nostalgia. And so these emotional states were mostly described positively, but awe and nostalgia were sometimes expressed more ambivalently. So for example, some participants said that they felt scared of how powerful the sea could be during a storm. And this is an example of negative awe. And as for nostalgia, thinking back to certain memories felt more bittersweet for certain participants. So here we see a quote of a participant who said that the grandeur, the greatness of the beach, of nature, of the dike, and then you just stand there as a small dot, yeah, then you just feel very humble, and from there you start thinking about life. So this quote really illustrates the emotion of awe because the participant is in presence of something bigger than himself, and this led him to feel more small and more humble and to also start reflecting about his life. And this brings us to the 4th theme, which is emotion regulation. And this refers to different strategies that the participants experience at the coast. So for example, the participants were able to exteriorize their emotions or reflect more on their thoughts and feelings, or they were also able to put things into perspective. And these different strategies enabled them to regulate their emotions and to cope with stressful situations. Now, the last theme demonstrates, which was the coast as a safe haven, demonstrates that for the participants, the coast represents a safe place where they can feel emotional and vulnerable and where they can have respite from the stress and the pressure of daily life. So all in all, the study highlights that the multisensory and symbolic qualities of the coast facilitates these experiences of complex emotions and adaptive emotion regulating processes. And these experiences appear to have a beneficial impact on the well-being of these young coastal residents. And we should therefore consider them as possible contributors to the coast therapeutic potential. So alongside this qualitative study, we also wanted to do a quantitative analysis of these emotional mechanisms. So for this, we did an experimental study in which we assessed the effect of exposure to coastal landscapes on stress reduction, meaning-focused coping strategies, and pro-environmental attitudes. And we also looked at whether the emotions of awe, nostalgia, and nature connectedness were potential mediators of this effect. And we were also interested in whether the presence of plastic in these landscapes maybe disrupted this effect of the coast. So for this, we did an online survey in which we randomly assigned the participants to one of 6 different conditions. And each condition consisted of watching a video clip of either the beach with the sunset, coastal dunes, or an urban street. And each environment either contained plastic or not. So here's an example of such a video clip where we can see the dunes and the plastic that is in there. And we also included sound. Voila. And so before watching the video clip, the participants were asked to fill in different control variables. And we also asked them to mentally visualize a recent stressful moment. We did this so that this would increase a little bit their stress level. And then we asked them to report their stress level before and after watching the video clip. And so we expected that their stress would decrease, but that this decrease would be stronger if they watched a video of the coast compared to a video of the urban street. And then we also measured the emotions they felt while watching the video, and we measured their coping strategies and pro-environmental attitudes. So we recruited a total of 248 university students.
You there? You back?
Yeah.
Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, we are still doing data analysis, but we do have some preliminary results that show us that compared to the urban condition, the sunset condition led to stronger stress reduction. And also both coastal conditions led to a higher experience of awe, nostalgia, and nature connectedness. So in conclusion, there is some support that the emotions of awe, nostalgia, and nature connectedness are potential mediators in the relationship between the coast and well-being. However, there is still a lot left to investigate, but looking further into these emotional mechanisms can help us develop the therapeutic use of coastal exposure due to the essential role that emotions play in well-being. And also, emotions have a very important influence on environmental behavior. And so they can maybe open a potential pathway through which we can increase public engagement towards protecting the coast. So that's it from my part. Thank you for your attention. And yeah, I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Maureen. I don't know if it was earlier, if it was actually my internet connection that fell out for a moment or yours, but anyway, I hope everybody online could hear it fine. So thank you very much. That was great. I think we have some questions in the Q&A already for Alexander. For those of you who are still gathering your thoughts for questions to Maureen, please put them in the Q&A, and I'll start with the first question for Alexander, if that's okay. So Alexander, the first question comes from Adriana Zingone. She says, very nice talk, so thank you very much. Any idea of possible direct effects on physiology by chemical or biological components of the aerosol dimethyl sulfate propionate that's produced by phytoplankton or bacteria and other microorganisms that are transported by aerosols?
Hello, Adriana. Thank you for this question. I am aware of a number of related direct effects from the sea spray aerosols, and they are all kind of under the umbrella term of the blue gym concept. So the first part of the blue gym concept is what we do, the health and the well-being from a very psychological side. A second aspect is the immunological response of the human, because if bacteria enter the lungs, there has to be an immunological response, which can also be health enhancing in low concentrations. And also the biogenics hypothesis, which is the third aspect, is really looking into these kinds of biogenic substances, such as DMSP. And they really interfere with physiological pathways not related to the stress response, as far as I know. But I will not pretend to be an expert in that field as well. So I will glad to redirect you to one of our colleagues who are investigating this, Zixia Liu from the Faculty of Bioscience Engineering from Ghent University, about the biogenics hypothesis, and Yunmeng Li from VLIZ about the immunological response.
Thank you. Thanks, Alexander. That was well answered for something that's obviously very much out of your field. Maybe if Alexander wants to, if the person who asked the question, who's now Adriana, wants to send us an email, then we can go on with those links. Okay, the next question is also for you, Alexander. Again, this one is from Rachel Bonici. Did you have a scenario where you tested health with seagoing vessels, so a boat on the water in the landscape, and if so, what were the results?
Thank you for this question, Rachel. It's indeed a very appealing thought to know this. We didn't include such a scenario in our testing, however, because we really want to target kind of the biggest population. And to my opinion, people who go on a boat or really at sea are usually very privileged, or they are fishermen. These people, because they are privileged and they have probably a higher socioeconomic status than most of the population, we also think that they would not really experience the full range of the health benefits because they are already quite healthy. So we really want to look into the different populations where the effects are largest. And we see from the UK, for example, that these are often the people with the low socioeconomic status. So that's why we are targeting a bit the research for the people who really need it and towards these applications, rather than focusing on the, please allow me to say, more luxurious effects.
I think, Alexander, what she meant was that not the people on the boat, but a picture of a boat in the so.
Like that.
I think that's what she means.
Yeah, we didn't do that, but what we did do was in the picture experiment of the open water, for example, somebody who really stood in the water close to the waves and the shoreline. I saw a bit the same as being on the open beach. So not extremely good. Being on a breakwater would be even better because you're even further in the water then. But definitely not bad at all.
Yeah, so I think maybe I'm reinterpreting what you meant, but for me, seeing a sailboat, for instance, gives a different feeling than to just see the open sea. So maybe that would elicit a different response, and whether it's a sailboat or a big tanker trawler might have a different response too. So that would be quite interesting to test as well.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. We included these fine-grained comparisons, but it was too fine-grained to really find effects in this exploratory analysis that we did.
Yeah. And then in the chat, there was a question from Britt, and I'm going to ask Marine to answer first. It was for both of you. It's actually similar to one of my questions. Would you expect similar results for your studies if you repeat them on the wider population, especially for you, Marine? So I think your first study had only 8 or so participants with varying socioeconomic backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And I'll start with that, and then I'll redirect my question to Alexander after.
Okay, thanks for your question, Britt. And definitely, there has been already studies that show that, so there is a link between coastal proximity and health and well-being. And studies have found that this positive relationship is actually stronger for those with a lower socioeconomic status. So it appears that this type of population benefits even more from living near the coast. So this was only in terms of, actually living near the coast. And there are not much other studies that look at this. But in terms of my type of research, I also will maybe redo this experimental study, but with a wider group, so with people with a lower socioeconomic status. And I do expect that it would also be a stronger effect, because these emotions of awe and nostalgia, other studies have found that people with a lower socioeconomic status have a higher tendency to feel these emotions. And I think that since this would be a stronger effect, that they're able to benefit more from the coast in terms of coping with more stressors that they probably have than people with a higher income or socioeconomic status. Yeah.
And I'm going to have a follow-on question to that before I come back to my question to Alexander. And that's my preconceived ideas is that somebody who's older might have more of a nostalgia effect than an awe effect. Is that something that's come out in research? And do you expect to see that? You know, if you did this with the graying population in Ostend versus the young people in Ghent, for instance, do you think you would find differences?
Yeah, that's also very good. Preconception. I also had that preconception, but actually, the studies that I've done is mostly with young adults, and there are also studies that show that nostalgia is actually peaking during younger adulthood, and then it goes down, and then it goes up for older adulthood. So people in their older life stage, and this is because feeling this emotion is important in times of transition. So usually younger adults are changing in terms of going to university and becoming adults, and or getting a job. And this involves a lot of stress or changes in their identity, and so they typically feel more nostalgic like that. So actually the results would be kind of the same if we look at the two. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Alexander, coming back to the question that Britt had, you know, if you would find differences if you did it with a wider population. My question is kind of similar, except different. So, you know, the Belgian coast has a very specific hard structure look about it. If you had to compare, if you had to do this study with, say, I don't know, people in South Africa or somewhere else which has a very long coastline, even France has a long coastline, not all of which is actually quite monolithic. Do you think you would get very different results?
I think so, yes. So what we have is in Europe here that the coast is mainly for the most of the people who visit it, it's a tourism aspect, it's a tourism thing. And in the south of Africa, I think more people are really dependent on the ocean, and that might reshape their particular experiences with it. And we see from attention restoration theory, for example, that people who have their job involved with the ocean, that they can, or involved with a particular environment, we don't know about the ocean yet, that these people can restore less in those environments because they are constantly reminded that they need to perform in those environments. So I suspect for tourism and local people in South Africa, for example, it would obviously also be different. But generally, I would expect for the residents to have a lower effect. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's another question in the chat from Britt. Would you expect? Oh no, hold on. That was the first one. So, can you elaborate on how you would imagine nature by prescription would work in practice, and is it already happening somewhere? I also had that question. So maybe Alexander, you would start and then go to Marine.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you for the question, Britt. Yeah, nature on prescription, it's a very appealing idea, but there's indeed a lot to be known about. So how would it work in practice? Well, what most people do when they are not feeling well, or they have psychological or physical complaints, is going to the general practitioner. So I would suspect that nature by prescription would originate there. And it's already being done in a couple of countries where hospitals and practically the whole healthcare system is really involved with these general practitioners to make that happen. But well, I suspect a bit, while the evidence is mainly there for green spaces, it's not yet there for coastal environments. So it may be very safe to get people to the green spaces, but it may not be for the coastal places, for example, because there may maybe a lot of risk factors, which we don't know about yet. So we really should do more research on this topic. And this is already happening in Denmark, I believe, and also in some regions of the UK. But I would have to look it up to be sure.
I think Scotland, it's happening in Scotland. So Marine, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, just that also, yeah, definitely agree with what Alexander said. And just to add that sometimes if going to the coast or to any natural space is not possible in terms of, yeah, imagine if you have a physical disability or it's not accessible, then I think that, yeah, virtual exposure or could also work in that case. So for example, the virtual reality study that Alexander is doing that shows that even being virtually exposed can bring these benefits on health and well-being. So maybe in practice that will also be a certain way to to increase these well-being and health effect. And also in terms of looking at at the healthcare in practice and using the coast, I'm pretty sure that there's this new organization called NHS Oceans that also did a launch last year, and I think that they're working on this a lot. So if you want more information on that, you can look at that.
Yeah, I was gonna just to say, Uncle has put in the chat that in Canada there's actually a news article that they recommend doctors to visit national parks, for instance. I was going to say that that was actually the comment I had with Alexander's talk, where he said that you need more studies before you could do this. And I personally think that this is precisely the case where I don't actually believe you need more studies. I think it is, I cannot foresee that there would be more risk to saying to people, go into green spaces or blue spaces because it will help your mental health, versus, you know, watching some virtual reality thing, which might have some physiological problems. You know, if you're close to blue light and all of that, there might be some physical impacts. So it's a little bit one of those things where quite often researchers say, oh, no, we need more answers. We need more research before we can be 100% sure. This is one of those cases where I'm not convinced that is necessary. And I'm not saying we shouldn't have more research, but for something that could really help have a positive mental impact on somebody, I think it's more benign. And yeah, we should be careful when to be too careful as a researcher. But that's my personal opinion, and I'm sure there will be people there that disagree with me on that.
Indeed. Maybe if I can quickly pick up on that. Yeah. It also depends on the people itself, of course. When you walk at the coast here in Belgium, everybody says, oh, look how healthy it is. But all the people that are not there may think differently about it. So, and indeed in Exeter, they have also at the European Centre for Environment and Human Health has also launched a document on nature on prescription and all the things where people involved, general practitioners, etc., should know before really implementing that.
Yeah.
I think that, like, also one of the aims is that we need to reconnect people to nature, because yeah, people are increasingly not connected to nature, not going outside, spending a lot of time indoors. So I think that's also something that we need to work on at the same time, because if people are not feeling connected to nature, then they will benefit less from going there.
Yeah, and then I see that Jackie Hood, hi Jackie, nice to see you virtually, has put a link on in the chat for the Exeter Medicine and NHS Ocean thing. And Alexander's also put some things in the chat. So thank you very much. I wanted to have one last question to you, Marine, and that was about, you didn't really tell us a lot about the environmental attitudes. I'm guessing you're not at that part of your study yet, but I'm really looking forward to hearing if that would actually make an impact, because I sometimes think that it will take more than that, more than exposing them to a beautiful place for people to remember not to throw their trash away, for instance.
Yeah, I can already say that unfortunately we didn't find an effect on pro-environmental attitudes, and I think it's exactly like you say, that just watching a video clip wasn't enough probably for people to feel more pro-environmental. But I mean, there are studies that show that people who live closer to the coast tend to also be more pro-environmental, or people who are exposed to green space also are more pro-environmental. And this is mainly due to the emotion of nature connectedness. So like I said, that feeling connected to nature. But yeah, it's definitely something that we will still follow up on, because it would be interesting to see in what conditions can we actually increase this engagement towards protecting the ocean and the coast.
Yeah, I think for the Ocean Decade and for the mission Ocean, both of those two things could really benefit from finding ways to actually make people care more. So that's great. I'm looking forward to hearing those results. I don't know if we have any other questions from anybody. I think I'm not seeing any. So if there isn't any other burning questions, I think we're nearly at the end of our time. So I will say thank you very much, both of you. That's been great. It's always good to see interesting new research coming up. And I look forward to hearing the rest of it, and getting more information on how we can get better health and mental health through being by the ocean. That's a good way to end this. So thank you very much. And I will just quickly then share my screen again, if I can. Give me one moment to say that our next webinar, science webinar, will be on Thursday, the 17th of March, same time, same place, and it will be on our policy document on the InSight program. So this is, I've forgotten, the influence of structures in the ocean. So the decommissioning policy document that we did, I think 5 years ago now. And our speaker will be Professor Dixon Howell from the InSight program in the UK, which is specifically looking at how do you decommission these structures in the North Sea in a environmentally sustainably way. So I look forward to seeing you all there. And again, thank you very much, everybody, for a very interesting webinar, and I will see you next month. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.